Hi, folks, and welcome to this GAL Executive Forum Executive Spotlight on the matter of the state of B2B marketing in the year 2023. I hope that in the next 30 minutes or so, you'll find this presentation illuminating for a number of reasons, not least of which is the sort of breadth of data that we're going to go across and the different dimensions that we want to today explore what B2B marketing faces by way of challenges. And to begin by framing, without any further ado, what I think is the most important characteristic of B2B marketing in the 21st century, and in particularly the post-COVID world, is the extent to which we've had to adapt, the extent to which almost all CMOs, as an indicator of this sweeping change, have made permanent changes to their strategy as a result of post-COVID. And those changes build upon adaptations to tactics made through COVID, which have stayed. And I think this is a very important way of thinking about the sorts of changes that we have to look at, because while it might be true that we are not going to face something like a global pandemic again anytime soon, regardless, there's plenty of other ways in which the marketplace continues to be very dynamic and demanding of change as a result of that, particularly because building the pipeline and, to a lesser extent, but as importantly perhaps, getting talent are really the two dominant priorities when you ask CMOs of B2B firms in the last period or so. And of course, that's no surprise because as a correlating indicator, this is more or less a mirror image of the most important strategic challenges that the average B2B CEO is facing. And it drives, of course, lots of pressure on the sorts of lead generation tactics and the underlying enablers of those tactics that I'm going to explore in this presentation in a little bit more detail, and not to want to stretch the metaphor too far. I can't help but think that it's something like the four horsemen of the B2B marketing apocalypse that we seem to be perpetually facing. And there is, in my view, four particular riders, if you wish, that really demand attention when thinking about the state of B2B marketing today. And they are the new economy characterized by post-COVID, but also many other changes. Sweeping demographic change here in the United States, which I do tend to harp on a little bit about, but I do like to remind folks of the breadth and depth of impact of that very important dimension. The changes in business culture, which are apparent, things that we see as a result of our engagement with our clients in different sectors of the economy, which I want to spend a little bit of time on. And then finally, and perhaps most obviously, the ongoing changes driven by all sorts of technological adaptations. And today, while I'm going to cover lots of those very, very briefly, I'll attempt at least to cover off the ones that we think bear the most in terms of importance in the short term, particularly for this year. Hybrid workplaces are resetting the new economy. Perhaps if there's one characteristic of all, when it comes to what B2B marketers need to think about more carefully and consider and perhaps challenge lots of the assumptions they make about reaching out to prospects as well as existing clients, is the degree to which 20 to 50% or more are working from home, depending on industry. Now, this has lots and lots of consequences, which I'll get to in a second, but just to illuminate on this point, if your customer is in the knowledge economy, That is, they're in the information sector, the finance and insurance sectors, the professional and business sectors, servicing the aforementioned and all of those following. They're probably working from home. Indeed, at least 50% of the time would be a very, very safe assumption when it comes to your prospects or your clients or your colleagues, so to speak, that are spending their working career now in the confines of their home or some other place, to wit, the rising number of digital nomads, and the aggressiveness with which lots and lots of countries are offering folks who can travel and work from anywhere the opportunity to move to those markets. And while it is, of course, true that there's a great deal of this change that is most recent and driven by COVID and so on, the truth is, of course, that every industry has some element of working from home. I've worked with major clients who one would think had practically none, but indeed had significant proportions of their workforce working from home. So one of the assumptions I think that we have to change is whether or not folks from a B2B marketing perspective are going to be found somewhere in a skyscraper or office building following a certain routine that we were all used to pre-COVID, or whether, in fact, they're in different arrangements, and they may well have been in those arrangements for some time. And I think very carefully about subsegments of those, which I won't dwell on, but I often think, in particular, those folks that have to care for others and really don't have the option of working from anywhere but home for that reason. That's a significant percentage of the population. Why is this so important? Well, I think from a B2B marketing perspective, hybrid workforces and their expansion in some sectors, I suppose their return to normal levels in other sectors, but regardless, a very, very large population, these matter because they're driving the evolution of new sales and marketing models. And I'm going to dwell on that a little bit more under the aspect of business culture. Clearly, it represents a significant disruption to some major industries, not least of which, of course, is the commercial real estate industry. I'm a Manhattan resident. There is something like 50% of the normal subway levels still to return, and something like 40% of all commercial leases still vacant. And these are big parcels of investment and ongoing costs that I think are just one simple example when we think about the knock-on effect of such a large industry and its importance to many, many others. So, and finally, because it becomes important to some organizations more so than others that they have large teams working in remote locations, we have to go about the process of redefining our business processes, which in turn can lead to major organizational change. So this is no mean thing. It's something to be very, very considerate of. I think there's a great deal more subtlety to this, and at the expense of making something much more simpler than it otherwise is today in the consideration time. But I do think it's one of the challenges that every one of us should be paying attention to as much as we can. One of the others is that we are undergoing the largest demographic shift in the United States history. There's lots of aspects of this that are important for marketing, and I do want to spend a little bit of time on it, because one of the features of this is that they don't, that is, those born since 1980 onwards, I suppose, they don't behave like their grandparents. And one of the most important ways to illuminate this difference is just the age at which they're deciding to marry, or more importantly, not marrying. And in fact, millennials, to a very, very large extent, are leading this extraordinary trend in deciding not to marry at all or delaying their marriages for a significantly longer period. Now, of course, this has lots of consequences. It means changes in household formation. It means even younger generations, particularly Gen Z, deciding that they're going to stay with their parents for longer. All sorts of impacts, which again cascade on to probably your clients and your prospects and the way in which their businesses have to change. But not least of which is that these folks, of course, are in B2B businesses. And in fact, I'm going to reveal to you shortly just how significant the age group of anyone born since 1980 and onwards has become when it comes to B2B buyers. Of course, don't forget that anyone born since 1980 represents now the vast majority of the United States population. And if the normal death rates continue, by the way, about 10,000 Americans pass every day. So it's no number to ignore that these changes will become more and more enduring and larger in scale. Another way in which they don't behave like their parents is that they don't read or write, or I apologize, read or view media the way their grandparents used to. And what is quite striking is just how significantly digital media consumption has overturned in favor of the traditional media to the extent that over 1.5 hours per day has been transferred at the expense largely of traditional media to digital media, and in particular media occurring on 5.5-inch screens or less. This is, I think, one of the most extraordinary things. Now, again, for marketers, we have to think very carefully about the extent to which, when we want to engage people, we're not engaging them on platforms the way that we used to. And in particular, those that are mobile platforms to think about. And just on the subject of mobile platforms and mobile content and consumption, and not to make too much of a fuss about it, because Gen Z's got a little while to go before they assume the offices of management, so to speak. But nevertheless, if you're going to start nurturing Gen Z, you need to nurture them where they get content. And of course, the overwhelmingly important sources of content are video and visually based. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later too, because that has enormous importance when it comes to production of content. One of the important features of the demographic change undergoing, which presents a challenge because of the talent squeeze it creates, is this meeting and declining of both the natural rate of birth in the United States and the immigration rate, which has significantly been altered. Now, what that's led to is something that's never occurred in the US history before, is the meeting of both the death and birth rates. There's been a little bit of improvement in favor of birth rates over death rates recently, but for the first time in United States history, only a few years ago, they came and they met and overlapped for a few years. Now, that's going to have consequences down the road, but it is very important to understand that the demography impact is not just one of age groups and population functions, but it's very important to remember too that our population is largely highly centralized around cities. As much as we think of ourselves as 50 states or so, the reality is there are about 9 or 10 to a dozen big centralized populations, and as indicated by this chart, that are where the jobs are, where people go to get employment. There is virtually little, if any, reason for anyone to think about a 50-state strategy anymore. And this is the point that I like to make repeatedly, that your business needs to be very, very well versed in where your prospects are, and not be versed on some of the sort of state boundaries that were made a couple of hundred years ago or more, compared to what in effect has happened, which is this vast centralization of the working population. Because millennials and Gen X are something like 90% of all B2B buyers. This is one survey. It mirrors other surveys that I've seen that indicate the same thing. Anybody born since 1980 is starting to take the reins in the B2B buying business. At least 60% of them are millennials. As those late boomers like me get out of the way, and so on, that shift will grow and grow. And to wit, the important changes and differences that I've just illuminated in a couple of cases: media consumption, household formation, getting married, all these other activities in which this generation is very, very different. And it's, in my view, a dangerous assumption to make that people in this age group are behaving about the same as their grandparents or their parents, because they're simply not. One of the things that I think has been remarkable as a result of the pandemic is the business culture change that's been adapting to post-pandemic realities. There seems, in my view, to be a quite striking willingness to rethink business culture, and in particular when it comes to the sales model. Remote and self-service purchasing being largely B2B e-commerce, has of course been widely adopted prior, but especially since COVID. In the meantime, ongoing pressure on margins in what is still a pretty tight economy for some sectors is reducing non-essential travel and related. And there are a number of studies, again, that I'm citing, one from McKinsey, which is widely available on the web if you choose to see it, the extent to which the sales model has become more and more in favor of remote engagement. The days of the traveling salesman getting appointments, making leads in person at their offices, in my view, is long since been over for the most part. It's not that I'm saying it's stopped altogether. Clearly, there's still plenty of travel going on, and for various reasons. But by and large, the idea of the salesperson on the road, so to speak, is not, I think, a stereotype that we should be entertaining for much longer, because it has significantly changed. And buying itself has also become a much more collaborative process. Something like 60% of buying decisions made amongst companies involve at least 4 people in the buying decision. And 50% of that team, so to speak, are participants as influencers or researchers or end users, not necessarily the buyers themselves. And so I think it's very helpful to think about buyers as a community rather than as a specific title or function. And each member of that community having slightly different perspectives on the buying process, which again has important implications for the way you choose to shape the content that you're pitching to your B2B buyers in order to act in favor of your business. Why is this cultural? Because I think it's indicative of the increasing flattening of organizations, with a much, much greater emphasis on organizations collaborating and involving folks at various stages of the process in order to make decisions which are more widely accepted and understood, and all of which is resulting in measurably longer buying cycles. And while 38% of those surveyed in a particular piece of research reported something like the same buying cycles, over 50%, a solid 55%, increase somewhat or significantly more longer, longer buying cycles. As an organization, that's something that we've seen. We've seen a noticeable increase in the time it's taking for decisions to be socialized and to be brought together by the various people that have something of a say in that decision. And of course, that has tremendous implications for things such as email cycles and the cadence at which direct marketing of other natures involved, as well as a variety of other very, very important tactics, which often are based on the assumption of a single target market, so to speak, when in fact you should be thinking about targeting a community of buyers at the prospects, companies that you're interested in doing business with. Let me get toward the end here by talking, of course, about how technology is resetting B2B marketing. Of course, it's been doing that for some time now. This is not news. What is news is the different flavors of technology which are coming along, it seems, at even quicker intervals, and with, of course, the speed that is characterized by digital technology, because it's driven by this kind of exponential feature, which, of course, is Moore's law and the increase in computing power, doubling almost every 2 years. I think it's doing a little bit faster. That it doesn't seem to be slowing down. By now, digital channels own the B2B marketing budget. That would come as no surprise, I'm sure, to anybody in the audience. It's something like 70 to 80% of the total B2B marketing budget is dedicated to digital channels. And of those channels that we own, so to speak, the website, email, mobile, collectively represent, the majority of those investments. I'm going to get into those channels in some detail in a second. Digital ads and search ads represent something like 20% of the investment, and earned digital, that is social and SEO, are another 20-odd%. These are continuing to trend in favor of them, not least, of course, because in comparison to traditional channels, they are a great deal more accountable. They generate data which can be analyzed and support investment decisions with a great deal more comfort than other analog channels, which are largely trying to rely on past data or indicative data, which is nowhere near as useful when it comes to predicting what people will do. Now, there's a very good reason why we're spending so much money in digital channels, and that's because digitally distributed content drives buyer research. When we look at what it is are the primary sources of information that buyers seek and where do they seek them, it's very much one or another type of what essentially is content marketing or content available on digitally distributed channels, like research and surveys, like case studies, the usual collection of very, very important content marketing types. And all of this does drive the importance of your content marketing strategy in the digital age, one which, in my view, is probably as important when it comes to lead generation tactics to consider as almost anything else that you do. But when it comes to content and content marketing, let me share a tip that I have been convinced by many years of working in the advertising industry, in the marketing communications industry, in the digital marketing industry, and being an avid reader and student of lots and lots of the new science around the way in which we learn, the way in which we engage content, and the way in which, more importantly, sometimes we just don't engage content. And there's a few very important tips, not least of which is that you must be clear, because you really don't have very long to inspire engagement. And in fact, when it comes to e-commerce, you've got something like 3 to 5 seconds on a homepage based on some of the measures, just to illuminate this point. And to remember that relevance is a function of where and when folks are engaged in content, it's as important as why they're being engaged in content. There are lots and lots of circumstances in which the best content will be very, very handicapped when it comes to being engaged by your prospect, simply because it's at the wrong time and in the wrong place. And this is a very important strategic consideration, and it's why customer journey mapping and customer journey analysis are so important to understand where and when you should be placing content for the most favorable outcome. And I can't stress enough how, when back to the science of learning and engagement and the way in which we go about integrating what we learn into our memories and into our attention span, that being visual, especially video, are key tools in your toolbox for driving engagement. Video marketing itself is something I could spend an entire one of these webinars on, and I may well do. I've done so in the past, but we are wired to learn visually. We learn something like 85% of everything we learn through our retinas. And so it's no surprise that visual marketing and video in particular are so powerful when they're done well. And finally, and sort of counterintuitively, I think for a lot of folks in the B2B marketing space, but something that I challenge you with and urge you to look into a little bit more so if you feel this a little awkward, but emotions are very much drivers of engagement. Now, that doesn't mean that we start singing and dancing or cracking jokes when it isn't appropriate in our content. That's not what it means at all, but it does mean that we need to be more inspirational when it comes to the content that we're conveying on digital platforms, and that content is somehow infused with the appropriate emotions that have to do with the buying decision itself, as well as what it is they're buying, as well as who they're buying it for. There are all sorts of ways to examine this. So as counterintuitive as that may sound, I do urge you to think about it. You know, there's been a lot of talk when we talk about technology. Perhaps one of the most important in the foreground is the metaverse, but the metaverse isn't just, you know, one platform. It's a whole swathe of digitally enabled tactics to consider, and I'm not going to spend time going through each one of them, except to say and to draw to your attention that the metaverse is the sum of many things. I'm not quite sure that it's there yet when it comes to sustainable, predictable sources of qualified leads for B2B marketers, but I do think it's worth paying attention to. I do think there are elements of the metaverse that are going to become important in the not too distant future because of their potential. And of course, B2B e-commerce isn't news to anybody, but COVID certainly gave it a nudge. And the overall e-commerce rate of sales as a share of total sales nudged past about 11% pre-COVID. And in some sectors, it's expected to get into the 30s, if not the 20s, very, very shortly. Now, I don't doubt this for a moment, because in the B2B space, there are many ways in which self-service digitally, which is what I think largely a B2B e-commerce site is, becomes incredibly attractive in a world where travel is down, where people are working from home, where all of the circumstances I've talked about earlier become very important to anything that makes the B2B buying process easier for people in those circumstances. And of course, it'd be remiss of me not to mention AI and its opportunity for B2B marketing. Again, there are plenty of vendors and applications and solutions already in lots and lots of different contexts. But I think there are 4 big buckets for B2B marketers in particular to be thinking about and looking for those applications. And that's in the area of content marketing, analytics, its impact on search. ChatGPT has a tremendous capacity to drive new search for B2B marketers. customer experience where it's quite a natural extension of the progress already made with chatbots. And then finally in CRM and organizing CRM tactics in ways which perhaps weren't available before AI had an understanding of it. Again, I'm not going to dwell on it, but it would be remiss of me not at least to pay attention to it and draw your attention to what I think are the big buckets of application. And let me close now quickly by some of the things that I think we should be doing right now as a consequence of the aforementioned and a variety of other things that I haven't mentioned that I simply wouldn't have had time for. Lead generation for growth remains the top strategic goal, and you're quite right to think that that's the job one. It absolutely is job one. And to make sure that your lead generation program is where it needs to be would be, of course, the right investment in your time. And when it comes to using media for the purposes of driving lead generation, email, social, and search are still kings of it. And despite the fact that, of course, we are as inundated as ever with those, regardless, they remain the most potent, and you are right to do whatever it is you think you need to do to continue to optimize them, because they do represent the most used and best ROI responses for digital media. And again, it would be remiss of me not to draw your attention to the fact that event marketing is critical as a lead generation tactic for the very reason of its ability of generating highly qualified leads for the top of the funnel, in which it is rated above most other forms of content and experiences as a result of that. And I would also just draw your attention to the fact that as a result of all of the aforementioned, virtual events are here to stay. It is the bulk of what we do here at Argyle and have done with great success, seeing 20 odd plus rates of growth, 20 odd percent odd great rates of growth in the last few years, including last year, and so far so good. That's because they're here to stay. 35% by way of increase from 2020 in terms of number of virtual events, some 40% odd increases in attendance, and of those questions, 72% indicating a re-attendance, as well as 27% planning even more attendance. And the average CMO, when asked, will cite something like 90% intending to continue to make investments in virtual events. And there are some good reasons for it. Virtual events have a tremendously strong ability to increase reach. We have experienced extraordinarily high reliability of attendance. We don't miss our attendance goals because it's an incredibly convenient way to engage in something that you think is important. And of course, it is extraordinarily accessible. And I make this point about those that are working from home, those that have to work from home, as well as those that may well still be in the office, but for lots of reasons can't travel. I would say that if you haven't by now, that you are certainly going to invest good time in knowing your buyer's community. This idea that it is not just one buyer, it's a community of buyers working with you and your company. The biographic, the demographic, the psychographic are all very meaningful ways in which to dimensionalize who it is you seek to target. And I would close on saying that there are some mandatories. These are the things that should be in place by now, or you're working on by now. And number one amongst all of those, if I was asked to nominate one, it would be that your databases are where they need to be. You should absolutely have a defining universe of your buyers on your database. There's really no technological reason not to be able to do that with the available data. And this gives you a tremendous advantage by virtue of its relationship to all of the other digital platforms that you would use and those things that you become to rely on. So your reach as a business depends largely on the quality of your execution when it comes to database strategy and database management. You will by now, if not on your way to building what I think of as a lead generation ecosystem, because leads themselves don't come from one source, they come from many sources. Those sources reflect where your buyer is on the customer journey, and your thoughts about where you're inspiring them to behave in your favor as a result, using certain content to drive leads towards you. And if I was to provide like a snapshot strategy format for you, I would think about what platforms those leads could be driven by, what content should occur on those platforms, and which communities of your buyers should be those that you seek as a result of that to begin with, so to speak. And then finally, you would want to make sure that you really do know your buyer, that you're using research of one form or another to get regular feedback. We have a very, very capable research team which does an extraordinary job of helping clients obtain insights that often do challenge lots and lots of basic assumptions. And again, I just cite the demographic changes that are going on right now, not least of which, of course, the technological changes too. And when we combine them, it's very, very important that you are back in the market, revalidating a lot of assumptions that you're making about the way in which you're driving your B2B strategy, because these things are changing, and they're changing at rapid rates. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I will just, there's a question that's come across amongst others, which is one I think I'd like to just quickly address for the sake of a few seconds. This is the question of, are personas still valid? And I have very mixed feelings about it, but it is why I think more about the psychographic of a particular member of the community than I would the persona. I do think personas are helpful when it comes to copy strategy. And I, having spent my career in the advertising world, writers, I think, are inspired by these characterizations of people to help them shape copy and to develop more compelling content. However, I'm not sure that personas are that helpful when it comes to making digital media decisions. And this is why I think it's important to cut the buyer definition or the community definitions in at least three. And as I mentioned, the biographic, the demographic, and the psychographic, which I mentioned earlier. If folks would like a copy of this presentation, feel free, please, to write me, pprice@argyleforum.com. If you would like to be engaged in a conversation about sponsorship opportunities with our events and experiences for the remainder of the year, there are still some good spots available in the finance, HR, IT, and other segments that we support. We will be releasing our second half program very shortly, and we hope that as a consequence of what you heard today, that you'll join us again for the next Argyle Executive Spotlight. And I'm pleased then that I'll be talking about in more breadth the difference between a virtual and a live event, and we look forward to hoping that you'll attend that spotlight as well as others to come. Once again, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it. On behalf of everyone at Argyle, I wish you the very best. Thank you. Bye now.